Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. I would like to start from the very last few hours. I just arrived last night late from Cairo. I had few meetings with the Syrian opposition. One of the meetings was with Mr. Michel Kilo, a prominent figure in the Syrian opposition, Christian, as his name suggests. We were talking about Islam and Christianity. He related to me the following event in his life. When he was a kid, he used to go to school and come back home and see all his colleagues, Muslims. He asked his father, he says, "Are we Christians or Muslims?" That was his, "Nahna Masihiyin wala Muslimin?" He said, "My father told me we are both Christians and Muslims." It's very interesting to hear this from a prominent figure in the Syrian opposition. I would like to speak about my own experience. I grew up in the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, central Damascus. My father was an imam of the Umayyad Mosque, his cousin, my grandfather's cousin, three of our families. I'm the fourth as an instructor in the Grand Umayyad Mosque. Within that 1 square mile around Damascus live Christians, Jews, and Muslims, Shiites even, side by side. When we crawled, moved around, attended classes, we were never told that these are our enemies. We witnessed people from all faiths meeting each other in a friendly manner, my father receiving guests from the Christian community and other communities, stopping at shops where his Christian friends used to sell things. They would greet him. He never told me these are our enemies. One of the major problems we have is taking theology outside classes of theology into the society. These are two major areas which I would like to highlight in my talk. The issue of finding principles of dialogue in our theologies. The second is finding a ground for the implementation of these principles within our communities. So two areas I would like to talk about, very challenging. First of all, finding elements, principles for dialogue which help us getting together in our theology. Because in our theology there are elements which could be used in either direction. We don't deny it. I'm talking here about Islam, naturally, and of course I would like to talk about the Christian faith in all of its schools, traditions. The challenge which we are facing now is that people are highlighting often, and especially in times of conflicts, heated up, are highlighting principles which talk about conflicts, destruction, hell, and so on. It's natural for any faith to get worried about its following and about its demise, about its growth, about its future. But these questions, if dealt with, should be dealt with within a theological circle, not taken into politics or taken into the streets. It's very also understandable that people of every faith would get worried when we try to talk about unification of faith and religions. When we come to dialogue, a lot of people in each tradition oppose our attempts to dialogue with each other because they think we are trying to unify religions and produce one copy. Religion is one anyway. Religion of God is one. God is one and religion is one. We have several understandings, several messages, several traditions. But the unification attempt create a lot of opposition. And this is very understandable. Now, to read in every theology that followers of other faiths would go to hell is natural in theology, but this is theology which protects the very existence of every faith. What we are facing now is taking this outside in newspapers, in Friday sermons, in our daily talks, to tell the commons that others are going to hell. Preaching hell used to be very popular in the past because people would cry and people would become fanatic and people would pay more money, but it shouldn't be so popular because it causes hatred. It causes fanaticism. I give you one example also from our Syrian conflict now. As you may be aware that we have a sect, a minority in power, called the Alawite minority, which in theology, Muslim Sunni scholars agree that these are non-Muslims. I wouldn't say what I suggest, but I'm telling you what is in books. A Sunni girl should and cannot marry an Alawite man. Now, to take this outside books of theology is very wrong. For example, when we raised up against the regime, I've always spoken up against the regime, but with the beginning of this uprising, March 2011, when we spoke against the regime, we never spoke against the regime because it is non-Islamic or because there is a minority in power. We spoke against oppression. Our statements, our interviews, our denunciation was not that these people are non-Muslims, not Sunnis, or they belong to a certain sect. Actually, there are several Alawites figures now joining the opposition, and we work with them side by side. The question of theology is a different one that relates to the hereafter mainly, and probably would have some effect on people in this life, but in terms of personal status law, marriage, for example, or a few other things which do not relate to politics or to everyday's life. People can be friends, neighbors, and I'm not going to preach you here on how Islam encouraged doing neighbors good, and from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, when he had a Jewish neighbor, he used to give him gifts and so on, and the Jewish neighbor also used to harm him, and every day, and the Prophet missed once this harm, and he asked about him and found out that he is ill. He visited him. We have a long history, many stories of that kind, but we need to speak about our time now and how to diffuse tension. So the first major issue is theology, and when talking about theology, we need to highlight the points which encourage us to work together without any attempt to dissolve in one body and produce one religion. When you tell Muslims that you have to leave your faith and produce a new faith, then of course they will keep away from dialogue. When also you try to provoke them by, let's say, proselytizing to them, they'll take a step against any dialogue. One of the very beautiful features of the Syrian society is the following. We lived side by side with all minorities for 1400 years. There was a tacit agreement. I learned this from my father, from the great scholars in Damascus. There was a tacit agreement between all sects, all followers of all traditions, including Sunni Muslims, that no one would proselytize to its religion amongst the others. That was a tacit agreement. Muslims would not go to Christians to do da'wah to them, as known in Arabic, to call them to Islam. Christians would never attempt to proselytize to Muslims. The same with the Christian faiths, Orthodox, Catholics, Protestants, the same with the other sects. Everyone is happy with their following. Everyone is happy with what they are on. We say the truth is clear, self-evident, it doesn't need an introduction. This tacit agreement helped a lot creating this atmosphere of, I wouldn't say love, I would be exaggerating, I would say mutual respect. At one point or the other, there was really that love between Christians and Muslims, for example, which was produced in many examples in our history. If we put two exclusions, for example, two exceptions in Syria, the Crusades and the conflict in 1960s, in the 1860s, Toshta Nasara, there has been always cooperation, understanding, and coexistence in the best way between Christians and Muslims. When someone dies within the Christian community, a prominent figure, a priest, we go and offer our condolences. They do the same. In terms of neighborhood, in terms of worship, in terms of social activities, there hasn't been any sort of, no one keeps aloof from the other. We're citizens of this country. Everyone is equal before the law. And we know that we need to have this cooperation between each other. But this is why, because we neutralized the theological principles which caused to conflicts. I don't have to tell a Christian that he goes to hell, or a Christian doesn't have to tell me that I go to hell, though it is in both theologies. We cannot deny it. I hope Christians do not deny it. They can quote, I have many quotes from Christian texts and from the major texts that anyone who is not baptized will not be entitled to salvation. It is in the catechalism of the Christian, of the Orthodox, for example, Catholic in the Vatican. Anyway, we have similar principles. We have similar statements. Anyone who doesn't say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah will go to hell. But preaching this in theology is something that is needed for the continuity of that religion. And you cannot delete it. But when you study it in a class of theology, to students, teaching them that, well, this is theology, is different from taking it to a Friday sermon, speaking in zealous in front of a few thousand people, telling them that Christians are unbelievers, kafir. The people would understand they have to be killed. They'll go in the streets with all hatred and try to kill them. Well, this is not theology. This is not Islam. This is not religion itself at all. It works against here the very existence of these traditions which Islam also wanted to guarantee to continue. I mean, Islam wanted the continuity of these traditions for several reasons. One of the reasons studied in theology is for the truth to be clear to everyone, for the challenge, for the debate to continue on the existence of God. So that's the first question which I would like to bear in mind, speaking as a preacher, speaking as a theologian. I teach in schools and I preach in mosques. This is one of the major things which we need to face within our communities. The second is finding a good ground for dialogue amongst our people to accept it before even to promote it. Dialogue is not a very popular subject. And let me tell you the truth. For several reasons. One of the reasons is probably the conflict between Islam and the West. And Christianity is now, or any dialogue with the Christians around the world now is portrayed as falling into that trap of working with the West. Well, Christianity is an Eastern religion. Before it was adopted by the West, by the Romans, Christianity is an Eastern religion. So I believe that from that point it could be refuted by the very history of Christianity. I believe dialogue with Christians and the Jewish people, all these faiths, should be part of our existence as Muslims. Because all these three Abrahamic traditions started in our regions. So I don't think I support the colleague who said that about our dialogue, that our dialogue between Islam and the West is wrong, because Islam is a religion and the West is a geographical area or a political entity, whatever you like to see it. Yes, indeed, dialogue with other faiths does not mean falling in the Western policies, imperialism or invading countries, or Arabs, Muslims in general, are taken now by emotions that there are campaigns from the West against the Islamic world. And although these campaigns on several occasions were for the benefit of Muslims, and like toppling Saddam Hussein, for example, and now in Syria, we welcome any Western military intervention to topple our regime and help us get rid of the regime and also of extremism in our country, because the existence of such regime will allow fanaticism to grow up on both sides, from the regime and from its enemies. And it looks like there is no middle way in between. So we need to find the ground for dialogue in our communities. A lot of things will help. Remembering history will help. Bringing stories from the past will help how Muslims. And I was honored to sit beside Dr. Suad Al-Hakim, and without even knowing who she is, and then we were introduced to each other, which encourages me to bring the Sufi element. We were raised up as Sufis, journeying to God. And Sufism is a common history and legacy between all traditions. In our Sufi legacy, when we read Sufi texts, stories of great saints such as Abu Yazid al-Bistami and the rest, we read that they found the best, most peaceful places to stay in monasteries. They lived in monasteries, worshipped God there side by side with Christian monks in Iraq, in the Syrian desert. They moved around, they related in their Sufi poetry, their dialogues with monks. It's a great legacy which could bring a lot of elements of love and respect between both traditions. In the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we have so much to nourish and feed these elements. Later on in our history, we had conflicts. But let me tell you my opinion, regardless of how, and I can prove it in several hours if need be, and I think I should write about it, that the major causes of conflicts between Muslims and the Jewish people and Muslims and Christians from the time of the Prophet himself were not religious. The major causes were political, not religious. When we go to religion, we see how the Prophet ﷺ worked together with the Jewish people of Medina, for example, how he accepted the Christians of Najran. But when there was some political conflicts, the Jewish people of Medina, for example, took another side with the enemies of the Prophet, with the people of Mecca, then there was a turning there. To take that turning into a religious conflict would be difficult, I believe, and will cause a lot of trouble later on, but we leave it into its political context. It was a political conflict for a political reason, and leave it there. Otherwise, we read so much in Al-Quran about the people of the book and the believers of the people of the book. We need to bring this in front of us to the public, to preach our people that regardless of any any differences we have, we need to highlight the common things between us. In order to make dialogue popular, we need to highlight topics which concern us as human beings altogether. There is an Arab proverb about conflicts between Arabs. They say, أنا وأخي على ابن عمي وأنا وابن عمي على الغريب. I side with my brother against my cousin, but I with my brother and my cousin against others. Now, I would like to say that we Muslims and Christians, the Jewish people, Buddhists, from everywhere, we have to put our hands together because we are facing now challenges to the human race. We are facing challenges now to ethics in the world. We have so many challenges, and we have to work together to save humanity. We have to work together to save the world of ecology. We have to work together to stop wars around the world. We have to work together to stop poverty. We have to work together to help oppressed people around the world. Both messages of Jesus and Muhammad, peace be upon them both, came to save humanity. We have in Islam something called Al-Kulliyat al-Khams, the 5 major governing principles. Protection, which all religions, we believe, came to protect. Life, honor, wealth, sanity, and religion. These 5 principles, all religions around the world came to protect, to guard. And if you find in any religion, including Islam, any principle that goes against one of these 5 principles, it shouldn't be an Islamic principle at all. We have so many examples from our daily life, let's say prayer and ablution. If someone is praying to God and his shoes are to be stolen, he interrupts his prayer to protect his shoes, to pick up his shoes, for example. Let alone talking about blood, about protecting the human life. We have so many beautiful principles we need to highlight. Now, when it comes to the conflict between religion saving our lives or bringing principle to conflict about, to fight about in religion, we say saving lives is prior to sticking to one point, fighting for it. Now in Syria, the Christians of Syria understood this very well, though there is a lot of criticism of minorities siding with the regime, but I give you countless examples of how Christians in Syria now understand this very well. Several Christians have been arrested in mosques. It's not a hidden fact that most demonstrations are starting from mosques. Christians are going to mosques. Some of them, they go in to attend Friday prayer there just to be inside because demonstrations start inside. Some of them wait outside to join the protests in order to show that they are one body with the rest of the society. These are beautiful examples. Several Christians were arrested on the ground that they were Ikhwan Muslimin, for example. They belong to an Islamic radical movement. It's so beautiful because they put life above everything. And if any religion doesn't respect human life, doesn't respect the honor of the family, doesn't respect sanity, doesn't respect, if we see any principle that goes against these, we have to reject it. As theologians, as religious people, as doctors of law, we have to reject it ourselves. But there isn't any. It's just sometimes people try to misinterpret text and manipulate them in order to reach their own goal, not the goal set up in our religions. So from that point, I would like to draw a clear line between theology, as I started, and politics, and say that in our daily life now, for the promotion of dialogue, we need to talk about politics a lot. Unfortunately, we need to clarify a lot of issues, and I'm not going to delve here because it's a hot topic now. I will be speaking about the movie insulting Prophet Muhammad and how our response should be in Oslo. I think after tomorrow, Friday or Saturday, I'll be speaking in Oslo about that subject. But let me tell you the following. There must be a lot of work from both sides on how to diffuse tension. How to diffuse tension. Now, I can sit with you and talk for hours, hopefully rationally. And I know that all of us will do this in a good manner. But would you think that the millions of Muslims would be doing the same while hearing in the news every now and then a big piece of news provoking them? It won't be easy. It won't be easy even for any preacher to calm down followers of every faith when they hear insults or provocative statements against each other. I know that you don't have this problem in Denmark here or in the West because you coexisted with the secular system. The church, coexisted with the secular system. The secular system revolted against the church authority and mentality and policy, and by the end, the church had to coexist with it. Well, it's different in the Arab world. In the Islamic world, it's different. The story is different. Religion is still part of our lives, still part of our society, though in most Islamic countries, not part of the political system. We don't have Islamic states, except probably very few countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Few countries are Islamic by the political system. But in Syria, for example, Syria is a secular state. Syria is not an Islamic state. In terms of law, legislation, constitution, is not an Islamic state. It's a secular state as defined. So anyway, Islam is part of the religion. Islam is part of the source of legislation to suit the citizens of the country. So we need to work a lot from both sides to diffuse tension. And this takes another talk. I'm sure you highlighted this. I heard some good comments about it. Professor Jorgen is a good friend. And this is to continue from people living in the West here, especially the community here Muslim community has been doing a lot of good work in that regard. I should leave some time for questions.
Thank you very much.